Hello, everyone, and welcome to Musing, music for the adventurous listener here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary and on all your favorite podcast platforms. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. On this episode, we are continuing with our series on extraordinary female creators for the month of March. Today, we're diving into the sound world of Vivian Fung, a Juno Award-winning composer known for weaving idiosyncratic textures and styles into large-scale works, a musical signature shaped by her multicultural background. NPR has called her one of today's most eclectic composers, and the Philadelphia Inquirer has praised her stunningly original compositional voice. That originality is vividly on display in all of Vivian's compositions, works that don't just present music, but expand how we experience it. So let's listen in. Vivian, it's such a pleasure to have you as a guest here on Musing. You were on my wish list for ages and ages, and I can't wait to dive in and hear about your latest works and collaborations. But first of all, how would you describe yourself as a composer and creator in your own words?
So I am an Edmonton-born composer, and I've led a multicultural life. So I was raised in Edmonton. I left to go to school in the United States, and I am currently living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I consider myself very much a Canadian composer, and I embrace a lot of different inspirations. And part of my inspiration is from traveling and trying to sort out my identity, what I identify with. And that doesn't necessarily relate to my heritage or my, upbringing. But I have a lot of large scale works and a lot of different influences. And I would say in my early period, as I was trying to figure out what my voice was, I was very much inspired by Southeast Asian non-Western music, and namely Indonesian gamelan. Since then, I think I have embraced a lot of different sort of disparate styles, but with the idea of really grappling with what my voice is and what I can bring to the table. And it's really, I consider my music as sort of a commentary or a musical diary on the times that we are living in now.
So you mentioned this. A lot of your works are large scale works for orchestras. Were there particular ensembles or collaborative relationships that really helped you get established as a symphonic composer?
Early on in my career, I taught at Juilliard for a long time. I got my doctorate there and I taught there for like 8 or 9 years. And actually, the album that really propelled my career is an album called Dreamscapes. And that was a collaboration between Metropolis Ensemble and two featured soloists, Kristin Lee on violin and Conor Hanick on piano. So I think that collaboration was quite formative in what was possible. And Kristin Lee actually was my student, actually at Juilliard. She was a student in my theory class. And at the end of every semester, I would play a piece of mine and also play a piece that I have been inspired by. And so gamelan came up. And at that time, I was also organizing a series on non-Western music, on world music. And I brought in a gamelan from Bali to the school. And she was really, really just so inspired by that. It was a different world for all of us. And so she was very much, influenced by those sessions that I brought into the class. And then she graduated and we lost touch for a while. And then she invited me to a concert that she was performing in. And I brought in Andrew Sear, the conductor of Metropolis Ensemble. And we were both blown away by her playing. And we decided that, maybe we should collaborate together on a violin concerto. And at that time, I was a member of the New York Consulate Gamelan, and we were about to go on a tour of Bali to participate in the Bali Arts Festival. And so she knew about that, and so she actually bought her own ticket to come with us to Bali. And she was on tour with us, so we toured all around the island of Bali, performing with local gamelan groups and things like that. And then upon our return together, I composed the violin concerto, and it's written for Kristin. And it was a meeting of the minds and the soul because she came with me to Bali and she witnessed and experienced all the sights and the sounds and the food and everything that I did. And it became very much a kindred dialogue between me and her because of our original relationship as student and teacher, but now it became more as colleague to colleague. And so that violin concerto went on to win a Juno Award in 2013, and it continues to be performed. It just was performed with Kristin this past fall, and then we're hoping that it'll be brought to Jakarta this summer with another violinist by the name of Nadzi Joe, and the Jakarta Symphony will be performing it as well. And then Kristin and I, as a result of this really special bond that we had, we continued to collaborate. So I've written maybe 3 or 4 pieces for her. And the latest one is actually going to be premiered next week on March 6th and 7th, which is past this podcast, but they're also going on a national tour of this piece. It's a violin concerto of sorts, but instead of an orchestra, it's going to be a percussion orchestra. So there's going to be violin and percussion quartet with sandbox percussion. It's very much written for them, and it's very exciting because it uses the violin against percussion backdrop. And because I am so comfortable writing for her, it's truly a collaboration. We're going back and forth the different drafts and really fine-tuning things and experimenting with it. So it's very exciting for all of us.
And such a testament to the composer and performer relationship and what can come from that when it's really nurtured and respected. That's beautiful.
Absolutely. I think, more and more as I grow as a composer and have some perspective, having these sort of relationships where it can be a true collaboration going back and forth, workshopping periods and really getting to know the performer that you're writing the piece for really does make a difference. It's not just notes on the page, it becomes something much more meaningful.
You've touched on a little bit about the trip to Bali and that really hands-on experience of the culture and the music, but can you talk to me about some of the other programmatic elements and perhaps environmental inspirations for your work?
There are several different threads. I mean, it just depends on, who and what I'm commenting on. But one thread is to do with our earth and our climate and the world, the environment that we're living in. I wrote this piece, and it was written to be a workshop premiered at the Banff Center, which is glorious and beautiful place. And, I grew up in Edmonton, so Banff was often a place that we went to during the summers or when we wanted to get away, and we would just drive there and spend some time in the hot springs and drive back. And inevitably, of course, we would visit the glaciers, Columbia ice fields. And growing up, that was part of the whole, Rocky experience. And so Steve Schick at the time in 2018 was one of the directors of the summer program. And he invited me to compose a piece with percussionist Yun Huang, who is a noted percussionist in the Toronto area. She teaches and is the head of the percussion at the University of Toronto. And so we started collaborating together. And again, I requested a workshop period where we would try things out and do things. And on this journey in Banff, I took my son, I think he was like only 2 or 3 at the time. We went to the glaciers to recreate my childhood. And I was so astonished to find that the glaciers had receded, and there were signposts to mark the year that the glacier had receded to. And it was, I imagine that now when you go to those mountaintops, a lot of the glaciers will be very tiny or even disappeared. And it really just brought tears to my eyes. I had such a visceral and emotional reaction to that because this is something that I grew up with, and it was something that was there and always there, and I thought it would be always there, and to see it disappearing before our very eyes was something quite sad and devastating to me. And so I decided to work with that. I decided to use that emotion to put that into the piece. So I originally intended the piece to be about water, but then we froze the water and it became a piece about ice. And so I wrote this piece called The Ice is Talking for Ayun, and it was prepared in 2018. And then Steve Schick has recorded it. Steve is like the god of percussion, basically. Every percussionist is well aware of his contributions to the genre. And he did this 3 CD set of just solo percussion, and he featured The Ice is Talking on the CD. And it is probably one of my most Canadian pieces because it is about the sound of ice. And when you first hear it, it's like simulating ice skating, the blade across the ice. And it uses 3 ice blocks and different sort of homemade instruments like butter knives and scrapers and that sort of thing to simulate those kinds of sounds. And it's complemented with electronics to give it some body.
The ice is talking. The ice is talking.
And talk to me about this marriage of traditional instruments and electronics in your works, and what the addition of technology brings to what would be maybe a more traditionally contemporary piece of music.
Yeah, I think it derives not from just the idea of using electronics, but it just derives from the need. And I'm not the best person. I'm not as facile as some of the younger composers when it comes to electronics because I didn't really grow up with it. So it is something that I very much need to, it's like something I have to learn and something actually I have to have help with. We had a sound engineer help us with everything as well. And I think it's, for me, a tool more than anything else to get a different dimension to express what I needed to express. And so because the ice was like, it had this unique sound world, but I felt I needed another dimension. And so that's where the electronics came in. And some of my solo pieces have electronics in it. And actually, I'm going to be writing a piece for violin and electronics soon. And the electronics are really, so I'm writing a piece for a violin solo for a violinist, Nancy Joe, that I mentioned before. She has been championing my violin concerto as well. But we went to her ancestral village, so in Guizhou, China. Her mom is part of a Buyi minority indigenous group in the mountains of Guizhou. And we started filming her family singing and dancing in traditional costume. And so we're going to be incorporating that into the violin music. So that's how I'm trying to layer the electronics with the music. Yeah.
I love that. It's like whatever the music requires, we'll figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll figure it out. It's like a tool. It's not in and of itself an ends to itself, but it's a tool for me to express what I need to express.
You've touched on some things already just in passing, but perhaps now when you look back, were there certain particular influences that were particularly crucial to shaping your career and your aesthetic, or were there certain turning points in your career that you can definitely see where you made certain decisions that had certain outcomes that affected your creative output and your career trajectory?
I'd say that trip to Bali I've been to Bali 3 times, and I think that was quite a coming of age for me because I grew up in Canada and I wasn't really exposed or didn't really think about identity until later. I consider myself a late bloomer for that reason because I was really trying to find my voice still in my 20s, and I really didn't feel like I was comfortable in my own skin until my 30s. And a lot of it has to do with just grappling with idea of who I was, where I fit into the world, and what I was contributing to with my compositions. I had this enormous and wonderful training at a Western school. When I graduated with my doctorate, I was like, okay, now what? You have all this training, but what do you do with it? And does it really speak to what you're trying to say? And for me, I was just putting to question all those things that I learned. And in a lot of ways, you have to kind of forget what you learned in order to find what it is that you really want to do. And those trips to Bali were really, it was like a spiritual awakening for me because it was the idea of finding out what was possible outside my little box. And for me, traveling does that to me because sometimes I get complacent and I have my little box here of my studio, and then traveling opens up your eyes and collaboration opens up your eyes. So anything to get me out of that box is going to be very important. And I like that. And same goes with collaborations. Whatever those artists that I respond to are those that really pull me outside and say, okay, let's take it here. Or what about this? And those kinds of collaborations mean the world to me. And I would say also another train of thought is exploring this idea of identity and legacy. For me is very important growing up in a Chinese household, but in Canada. So I wasn't really aware of all the layers of things that went on in my family history. And only recently, I've been documenting some of this in oral history. And I'm embarking on my first opera. So this opera title is My Family, Cambodia, 1975. And it's about my extended family. So I grew up in Canada, but my extended family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, maternal grandmother, they all grew up in Vietnam and Cambodia. And the year I was born in 1975, some of them were in Cambodia. And as you may know, in 1975, it was the Vietnam War, but it was also the year that the Khmer Rouge stormed into Cambodia. And it began the regime of terror in Cambodia with the genocide there and everything. And so this opera kind of traces how my family, 13 of them, fled in April, and it retraces the steps of their escaping. And they miraculously all escaped, but it's the idea of their escape and then eventually coming to Canada and the idea of the trauma and the flashbacks that are associated with it. For me, that has become very important, the idea of what legacy I want to leave behind and what I want to contribute.
And a deeply, deeply personal work. What has been your family's response to you setting their experience to music?
I've interviewed my cousins and my aunts and my mother, and it's very funny how trauma works because a lot of things, especially in my family and maybe probably typical in a lot of Asian families, is that a lot of things that are taboo. And so a lot of things that are unspoken and not freely expressed. And the idea of living through trauma is one of them. It's not something, and that's something that I had to discover myself, that there is intergenerational trauma as well. And something that you grow up with and you feel it, but you can't express it because there are no words to express it. And so I want to express it and I want to shed light on that because it's very important for us to do that, to make sure it doesn't get repeated again and to share what it's like. I think that's very important, a very important story to tell. And so it's very trepidatious because it been a taboo subject. It feels very raw. It feels very raw, but I think it's very important.
And music is this amazing vehicle that can carry these difficulties and reframe it.
That's right. And there can be a lot of joy that can come out of it as well.
I'd like to just dig a little bit deeper into perhaps the life and career and how they connect. What were some obstacles that you faced in realizing your creative identity? You touched on it a little bit, that it took a while to find your voice. And perhaps you could expand on that a little bit more, how you went about finding your own voice and overcoming some of those initial obstacles. I think that's so important for composers feel so grounded in their own identity and their own musical voice, but it's also so difficult to grasp somehow.
Yeah, I think for me, my journey was quite long. And because I think in my 20s, I was a confused girl coming from Edmonton and landing in the big city of New York. And I think it didn't help that I didn't have a female mentor to guide me through the process of this coming of age. My mentors were okay, but they were, and I believe me, I appreciate the training that I had, and I'm appreciative of all my teachers, but it wasn't like I could talk to them about anything that I was struggling with, really struggling with, right? Work and schoolwork and the projects are one thing, but to really grapple with, you talk about female creators, that you're featuring female creators in March. And the idea of a female creator was, I looked around me in my school, in my class, there were very little colleagues that were female. The vast majority were male, and all my mentors were male. And I couldn't talk to them about my life decisions and how that would affect my career. And for a long time, I was led to believe that I couldn't have a family because of the fact that it was only about work. It was not about life. And that could be farther from the truth. And actually, that held me back in a lot of ways because I was always listening to someone else instead of listening to what I thought was true. And that's what I struggled with in my 20s. I was led to believe that you couldn't have a family, that you couldn't have a kid because that would be the end of your career. And then things started to change and you meet someone and then you find out, oh, maybe I would like to have a family. And what is that like? And I couldn't ask anybody because there was no one for me to ask. And it wasn't something that you could talk about either. It was also very taboo. And so when I became pregnant, it was also confusing. What do I do? How do I chart this territory for myself? And so I had to just learn and juggle things instinctually. Going through that process actually has made me a better composer because of the fact that I have learned to trust my instincts so much more. And I truly believe that anything is possible if you allow yourself that possibility to happen. I have a son who is now almost 11, and I think he has given me so much creativity in my life. And the idea of what is possible is truly been expanded. My mind has been expanded as a result of my experience with parenthood. And it's just made my life so much fuller and more meaningful because of that. And I can put that into my work. And everybody's journey is different. And I think it's dangerous for someone to say, this is the career path you should take, because everybody's life is different. And you can't really dictate what a composer's life should be. And I think that is something that I've learned the hard way. And I hope that, and that's why I like mentoring a lot as well, because I like to think of what is possible and what can be something that can be inspiring for the next generation as well.
And my next question was like, what advice do you have for aspiring composers, especially female composers? But I think that pretty much covers it, unless there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think everybody's life journey is so different. But if you truly love to create or compose or do that, I would say follow that path. And don't be afraid to embrace the difficult, because through the challenges, you find a lot of beauty and you find a lot of meaning. And I think that it rewards you back in so many different ways. I think I can look back and say that all my struggles and all the challenges are worth it.
When people encounter your music, whether it's live in a concert hall or listening to one of the many beautiful recordings that are circulating, what do you hope that they experience or take away from hearing your music and being within your music?
I think just have an open mind. Some of the textures are very different, and some of them are melodic and some of them are not. And then some of them embrace different cultures or is inspired by different cultures. So I would say just to have an open mind. And a lot of my music is very rhythmic and visceral. So there is that to grapple on with. And I hope that because of the way I compose, that I always am mindful of that the music has an arc and has a sort of craft to it. So there is a lot of hard work and sweat that has been put into it. And hopefully that'll come through in the music when you hear it. Yeah.
And you mentioned the opera, but what else is in store for you creatively or venues that you are looking to explore?
So I have a CD that is coming out. So this is a collaboration with the tenor Nicholas Pan. He is an amazing tenor. He lives here in the Bay Area, but he travels all around the world. And he is going to be releasing an album entitled Lamenting Earth, which is the title of my song cycle. And it is a project with Jasper Quartet, Nick and Myra Huang for string quartet, tenor, and piano. And it's really talking about the impacts of humans on our lovely Earth. And so it's going to come out on Earth Day. It's a wonderful project. I love working with Nick. He's got a beautiful voice, but also he is a human being that is very much concerned about some of the social impacts of our lives. And he has created several albums about that. And this album in particular, this is my song cycle is at the center of it, but it's an album about that idea of the earth and of the environment. And so I think it's something to look out for.
Beautiful. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to highlight?
In these political times, it's so fraught right now, especially in the US. And I just want to reiterate that I am such a proud Canadian. I return to Edmonton every few months because my parents still live there and I go to visit them very often. And every time I touch down, I just am so proud that I'm Edmontonian and a Canadian because of life decisions and because of meeting an American. I've settled here in the Bay Area, but make no mistake, I'm very much Canadian and I'm very proud to be that. And it stands out for and the sort of all the political and social meaning behind that. I think it means so much to me. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Like I said, this
Thank
is one
you.
of my favorite things to do is to take a deep dive into a composer's work and creative output and their life journey that brought them to this creative place for all of our benefit. So thank you so much, Vivian, for sharing so freely of your expertise and creativity.
Thanks, you.
Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. Musing is produced on the lands of many Indigenous peoples across what is now known as Canada. We acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose stewardship, knowledge, and creativity continue to shape this land. We recognize that this music and these stories exist because of their ongoing presence, resilience, and care for this land, and we offer our respect and gratitude. Until next time, thanks for listening. Take care.